Hello and welcome back to Tech Talks with Kinsoft. I'm your host. Today we have a heavy one. We aren't just looking at the latest gadgets or, software updates. We are looking at a stack of documents that paints a pretty worrying picture of the education sector in Australia. We've got news reports, a dense 160-page compliance manual, and forensic timelines of a major cyber event.
It is good to be here, and you are right to call it heavy. We are diving into the intersection of elite education, cyber vulnerability, and the very strict rules that are supposed to be keeping our data safe.
So let's set the scene. It is August 2025. We are talking about Scotch College in Melbourne. This isn't just any school. This is one of the most elite private schools in the country, charging over $34,000 a year for tuition with a history spanning 174 years. And then, over a single weekend, the lights go out.
It was a significant breach. And our mission today is to analyze this event not just as a piece of news, but to understand why the education sector is suddenly under such heavy fire. We need to contrast the chaotic reality of a hack like this against the rigid privacy frameworks these schools operate under.
It really is a crazy story. How does an institution with that kind of prestige, that kind of resource base, get taken offline by an unknown third party? And more importantly, what happens to the data of alumni who include former premiers and high court judges?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. When you look at the source material, specifically the reporting from Peter A. Clark and the Cyber News Center, the details of the Scotch College incident reveal a lot about the current threat landscape.
Let's get into the timeline then. It was August 15th, 2025. The principal, Dr. Scott Marsh, sends out a letter confirming that over the weekend, an unauthorized third party accessed their IT systems. Now, usually you hear about these things weeks later, but this seemed immediate.
The response described in the sources was incredibly drastic. I call it the nuclear option.
The nuclear option, you mean because of how they reacted?
Essentially, yes. Dr. Marsh stated that they shut down all servers and disabled all accounts. Everything. They even postponed non-essential online events.
But isn't that overkill? I mean, shutting down the entire school's digital infrastructure, email, learning platforms, admin records for a breach. That paralyzes the institution.
It does, and it is a controversial move, but think about it from a containment perspective. In a ransomware scenario or an active intrusion, the fog of war is real. If you don't know exactly which account is compromised or which server is patient zero, you have to assume they all are until proven otherwise. Sometimes the only way to stop the bleeding is to stop the heart.
That is a terrifying thought. And they immediately engaged the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and forensic experts, which is standard procedure, but the disruption must have been massive.
And the stakes here are incredibly high. We aren't just talking about grade 8 math homework or, the cafeteria menu. The sources point out that the breach exposed records of old Scotch collegians and families.
Right, I saw the list of alumni mentioned. We're talking about people like Jeff Kennett, the former Victorian Premier, Andrew Holmes, former president of the Australian Academy of Science, Kenneth Hayne, a former High Court judge.
Exactly. This isn't just student data. It's a trove of information on some of Australia's most influential families. If you are a threat actor, that is leverage. That is high-value data.
So why are schools such targets? Peter A. Clark had an interesting take on this in his article. He mentioned that schools often have hallowed halls, but basic IT maintenance.
It is a systemic contradiction. Clark points out that schools are entrepots. They have numerous entry points. You have hundreds of new students joining every year, others leaving, parents needing access, contractors coming in. The authorizations are constantly changing.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare to secure.
It is. And unlike a bank, which is a fortress by design, a school is designed for sharing and openness. Plus, they are often running legacy systems, old servers, outdated software with inbuilt weaknesses that modern hackers can exploit in minutes.
It's the classic weak link problem. You can have great gates at the front of the school, but if the digital backdoor is held open by an old server, you're in trouble. And looking at the sources, Scotch College wasn't an isolated case, was it?
Not at all. If we zoom out and look at the trend analysis provided by Weber Insurance Services, the picture gets much darker. The education sector is being hammered.
I was looking at that list, and it is startling. August 2025 was a bad month, generally. INET and TASI aged care got hit too, but the education pattern is undeniable.
Just look at the precedent. December 2024, Waverley Christian College gets hit by the FOG ransomware group. They stole 5 GB of data.
And then in April 2025, Western Sydney University has 10,000 students impacted. Now that one surprised me. You'd think a university with all its research grants and tech departments would be harder to crack than a high school.
You would think so, but it goes back to that entrepot concept. Universities have even more transient populations and often even older legacy systems buried in research departments. It forces the question, if these breaches are happening left and right, are these schools just being careless or is the bar set too high?
Well, surely there are rules they have to follow. They can't just operate on a handshake agreement regarding our data.
That is where it gets fascinating. We have access to the Privacy Compliance Manual produced by Independent Schools Australia and the Catholic Education Commission. This is the rulebook.
I have to say, reading this manual was a bit of an eye-opener. You assume there are rules, but seeing them written down, they are incredibly strict.
They are. The manual is built around the Australian Privacy Principles, or APPs, specifically APP 11, which covers data security.
Right, and the core phrase there is reasonable steps. Schools must take reasonable steps to protect information from misuse, interference, and loss. But reasonable feels vague. What does the manual actually require when it comes to, say, getting rid of data?
The destruction standards are surprisingly specific. It's not enough to just scrunch up a piece of paper and throw it in the bin. The manual literally specifies shredding, pulping, or disintegration.
Disintegration?
Yes.
That sounds like something out of a spy movie.
I need this report disintegrated immediately. It does sound intense, but it highlights the standard. If a document can be pieced back together, it hasn't been destroyed. And for electronic data, it says it must be put beyond use.
What does beyond use actually mean in IT terms?
It is a critical definition. Beyond use means the school cannot access it, they cannot give anyone else access, and crucially, they must have audit trails proving it was destroyed. You can't just hit delete and hope for the best. If you can recover it from a recycle bin or a backup tape, it's not beyond use.
This is like a high bar for a school IT admin who might also be teaching a math class. And then there's the cloud. This is where I got a bit confused, and I'm hoping you can clarify. The manual has a whole section, Part D, discussing Google Apps for Education and Office 356.
Yes, this is a very nuanced area, but it's vital for understanding liability. The manual debates whether using a service like Google Drive, where servers might be overseas, constitutes a disclosure of data or just a use of data.
Why does that distinction matter? Is it just semantics?
It is a massive legal distinction. Think about it. If you disclose data to a server in California, you are technically handing over control to a foreign entity. That triggers APP8, meaning the school is responsible if that U.S. company breaches Australian privacy laws. It's a liability nightmare.
Right, so if Google messes up, the school's on the hook.
Exactly. But the manual offers an escape hatch. If the contract explicitly says the vendor can only store the data, no mining for ads, no AI training, no accessing it for their own purposes, then it's treated as use, not disclosure. It keeps the data technically within the school's control, even if the hard drive is physically in San Francisco.
So it's all about the contract language.
Precisely. But the takeaway for parents and listeners is that schools are warned to check where those servers are. Often they are overseas. And the manual explicitly says schools should update their privacy policies to warn parents that their child's essay or their medical record might be sitting on a server in Singapore or the U.S.
That is wild. You just assume your kid's work stays in the classroom, or at least in the country. So we have the breach and we have these complex rules. But what happens when the worst-case scenario actually hits? The manual has a data breach response plan template.
It does. And looking at the Scotch College response, they seemingly followed the textbook approach. The manual outlines mandatory steps. Step 1, contain.
That's the pull the plug move we saw.
Exactly. Step 2 is assess. The team has to determine if the breach is what's called an eligible data breach, or EDB.
And this leads to the serious harm test. This part really stood out to me because it defines harm much more broadly than I expected.
It is the most human part of the compliance manual. The school has to evaluate if the breach could cause physical, psychological, emotional, financial, or reputational harm.
Emotional and psychological harm. I think we often forget that. We worry about credit cards. But for a student, having behavioral records, counseling notes, or family court orders leaked, it's devastating.
Absolutely. The manual actually lists risk factors in Annexure 3. It asks, who is affected? Is it students? Is it contractors? And crucially, is the info intelligible?
Right. Is it encrypted or is it just plain text? There was an interesting detail in the manual about considering if the data is protected by a security measure, and this is key, how likely it is that the hackers can circumvent it.
Which brings us to the reality check. Because you can have this pristine 160-page manual demanding military-grade encryption and disintegration of documents, but then you walk into the server room or the staff room, and the reality is very different.
There's a huge gap between the policy and the practice. And actually, we saw this play out in real time on a Reddit thread discussing these Victorian breaches. The users there, mostly IT admins and students, weren't quoting compliance manuals. They were talking about the messy reality of school IT.
The community reaction is always a good barometer. You had users like CubeZera commenting on consultancy bonuses.
Yeah, that comment stung, basically saying organizations won't admit fault because they don't want the vendor to sue them. So instead, they hire consultants, everyone pats themselves on the back, and the hackers walk away with the data.
There is a pervasive feeling that big companies and the government simply aren't doing enough. One user noted they use these breaches as a lesson to their kids that none of their info is safe online.
It's a sad lesson to have to teach. But there was a specific technical debate in that thread that I want to drill into. It was about passwords. Users Sep Underpants and Appealing Genitals, classic Reddit usernames, were arguing about hashing and salting.
Yes, the usernames are colorful, but the advice is actually very sound. This is a concept everyone should understand because it explains why some breaches are catastrophic and others aren't.
So break it down for us. Most people have heard of hashing. That's scrambling the password, right?
Correct. Imagine you have a password, say Bluey123. You don't want to store that as plain text in your database. So you run it through a mathematical algorithm, a hash function. It turns Bluey123 into a long, scrambled string of characters, like that SHA-3 example in the source, 32459, and so on.
Okay, so it's scrambled. That sounds secure. If a hacker steals the database, they just see gobbledygook.
It used to be secure, but computers are fast now. Hackers have what are called rainbow tables. These are massive, pre-computed lists of millions of common passwords and their corresponding hash strings.
So if they see that specific scrambled string in the stolen database, they can just look it up in their table and see that it equals Bluey123.
Exactly. It's like a reverse phone book. If you just use simple hashing, your password is cracked in milliseconds.
And that is where salting comes in. The Reddit users were adamant about this.
Yes. Salting is the antidote to rainbow tables. Salting means adding a random string of unique data, the salt, to the password before you scramble it. So for student A, you might add X7Z to Bluey123 and scramble that combined string. For student B, you add 9QP to Bluey123 and scramble that.
So even though they have the same password, the result in the database looks completely different.
Precisely. And because every user has a unique salt, the hackers' rainbow tables are useless. They would have to recalculate the hash for every single user individually. It turns a job that takes seconds into a job that could take centuries.
It seems like such a basic step. Why isn't everyone doing it?
Complexity, legacy systems, laziness, it varies, but the impact is real. There was that anecdote from the IT manager on Reddit who ran a Have I Been Proud session for staff.
That was telling. They asked staff to check their emails against the database of known breaches. Only 3 staff members out of the whole group hadn't suffered a breach.
Only 3. It really highlights how prevalent reused passwords are. If one site gets breached, say a shopping site you used 5 years ago, and you haven't salted your passwords or you reuse that password at school, the school is vulnerable.
It connects everything back together. The hallowed halls, Clark mentioned, are being protected by people who are likely reusing passwords that were compromised in a completely different hack years ago.
It creates a massive surface area for attack.
So let's bring this all together. We've seen the Scotch College headline, which is scary. We've seen that it's part of a massive trend attacking the education sector. We've looked at the strict rules, shredding, pulping, serious harm tests that schools should be following. And we've learned that technical basics like salting passwords really matter.
I think the biggest takeaway is the disconnect. We have incredibly sophisticated compliance manuals. The privacy compliance manual is thorough. It covers everything from cloud servers to emotional harm. But the reality on the ground, as seen in the Reddit comments and the sheer volume of breaches, is that implementation is lagging.
It feels like a race, doesn't it? The hackers are sprinting, and the schools are trying to run with a 160-page manual strapped to their backs.
That's a good analogy. And we have to remember, schools hold the most sensitive data of our lives. We aren't just talking about credit cards. We are talking about medical records, behavioral reports, family court orders, learning disabilities.
That brings us back to the serious harm test we discussed.
It does. Compliance isn't just paperwork or ticking a box to avoid a fine. It isn't just about avoiding a headline. It's about protecting vulnerable children from real-world harm. When a school's data is breached, it's a breach of trust that can last a lifetime.
That is a heavy thought, but an important one. We need to move beyond just reading the headlines and start asking the hard questions about how that data is actually being guarded.
Absolutely. It really highlights that data security isn't a set and forget document. It's an active, daily defensive posture.
And that is a hard standard to maintain alone. Whether you're running a school with thousands of students or a business with sensitive IP, the gap between your manual and your server room is where the risk lives. If you need help closing that gap, or you just want a security audit that goes deeper than a checklist, go to www.kinsoft.com.au.
They can help you bridge that gap between the manual and reality.
Exactly. Check them out at www.kinsoft.com.au to discuss your security and IT needs. Thanks for listening to Tech Talks with Kinsoft. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time.